only a minute. Let's get this show on the road. Good evening and welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. My name is Emily Wilkins. I am the immediate past president here at the club and a correspondent for CNBC. 2024 was really one of the most dramatic presidential election cycles in modern American history. So many twists and turns. And few have chronicled it as well as Tyler Pager of the New York Times and Isaac Arnsdorf of the Washington Post. I think you guys were both at the Post at the time, but you know, lots of movements, lots of changes. Tyler, Isaac, as well as their co-author Josh Dawsey. He's with the Wall Street Journal. He unfortunately was not able to make it here tonight because of a travel snafu, but he's already wished us well, so that's positive. These are really three of the most deeply sourced, widely respected reporters in this town. And to have the three of you guys kind of team up and come up with this book that really delves deeply into all of the details of the 2024 election, the story about how the Republican Party took someone who was almost an outcast and made him their nominee and then the winner, and the story of how the Democratic Party changed candidates halfway through. Really, again, just so many twists and turns, and you guys really bring this rare depth of access and insight into the chaos of what happened during this presidential campaign. They drew on months of reporting and unparalleled access to key figures in both parties. We'll get into that later. These journalists take us far beyond what was seen on debate stages, rallies, or in campaign ads. They reveal the quiet calculations and internal battles that shape the course of one of the most unique elections in modern times. And the details between both Trump and Biden, as well as Harris, with only 100 days to go. So with that, please join me in welcoming Tyler and Isaac to the National Press Club. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess I'll just start at the top with what made you to decide that you need to take your reporting and actually put it into a book?
Yeah, I mean, so the three of us were working at the Washington Post together. I was covering Joe Biden's White House and campaign, and Isaac and Josh were covering Trump and the broader Republican Party. And this was in 2023. We started this project long before that fateful debate. We felt uniquely positioned to capture this election that we figured would be dramatic, like most presidential elections are. We didn't expect as many twists and turns and unpredictable moments and dropouts and a new candidate as it turned out to be, but we wanted to, at the end of this cycle, step back and say we've delivered the comprehensive, definitive story of this election. Our proposal was a rematch, the first rematch in modern presidential history. We anticipated it would be Biden versus Trump, and we wanted to draw on our years of covering those men to give readers insight beyond the headlines. A lot of people, obviously there's no surprises, you know who won the election, but we wanted people to really be able to understand how we got to where we are.
And so that's interesting. When you did the proposal in 2023, you already thought that Trump, and what was it at the point where like DeSantis was still like an element out there and could have potentially gotten the nomination?
It was, I remember it was right after the DeSantis reboot, or the first DeSantis reboot, and I was on the bus tour with him in Iowa, which I was calling the Wheels Come Off the Bus tour. And it was very clear at that point that he did not have what it took.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah, no, and I was just going to say, I mean, the reason, regardless of whether Trump won the nomination, we knew that he would be a big character because so much of the story at that point was his criminal trial, his criminal indictments, the idea that he would face trials in multiple states, and also just the way in which it was either the conclusion of his political career and run, whether that meant he lost the nomination or ended up losing the presidency. Obviously, neither of those things happened.
And then on the back end, I mean, you know, obviously we were covering it in real time. And then once it was over, is actually when most of the reporting and writing started. And for me, I think that was sort of a process of like personally trying to sort out what we just lived through. And, you know, we were left with a lot of questions about why things happened the way they did, and did they have to be that way? And so the book was kind of trying to get to the bottom of those questions we were still left with.
Was there any one particular question that you went into the book process with where it's like, well, I covered this event, but I just don't understand the why, and that you were able to answer in the book?
I mean, there's so many questions.
What was your favorite?
I mean, I think one of the things that I really wanted to better understand was Joe Biden's decision to run again, the way in which he interacted with his aides and thought about running. I mean, there's obviously a lot of conversation about Joe Biden and his age in the aftermath of the election. And at the time, I think it's easy to forget now, but in 2023, 2022, even before the midterms, the majority of Americans and the majority of Democrats did not want Joe Biden to run again. They thought he was too old. So this idea of his age being a concern was not new. And I wanted to understand how inside his inner circle they discussed that as part of the decision to run again. Spoiler alert, they didn't really discuss it with him. The opening of one of the chapters is Joe Biden decided to run for president by not deciding. He told his aides, I'm running until I tell you I'm not. So there was this mystery of like, what were these meetings like? How did they talk about it? And through extensive reporting, we found out they didn't really talk about it with him. There's more we can get to on that, but I think that was a big question that we wanted to answer in the book.
Yeah. And Isaac, I don't know if you wanted to take a stab at kind of your biggest why.
Yeah. I think for me, it was how Trump redefined the Republican coalition and the electorate. And we sort of knew, we were reporting on their theory of the case in progress, but there was a lot of reason to be skeptical of it. They were on their own terms, they were going after like the high hanging fruit. They were like, we're gonna get the people who don't usually vote and get them to vote. It's like, the conventional wisdom is that's way harder than persuading voters to vote for you. And also that they were going to address the gender gap by running up the score with men rather than trying to hold their ground with women. And so understanding both how they came up with that strategy, how they executed it successfully, and then where that leaves us going forward, and clearly the Democrats are still struggling to get their heads around that now.
Yeah, and I actually just want to stay on that for a minute because I remember covering election night, seeing the results come in, I think it was the New York Times that had that map of like all the counties going more red, more red, more red, seeing the numbers with black men, seeing the numbers with Latino men, seeing I think the numbers with black, Latino, Hispanics in general. I mean, what was the secret sauce here in terms of really making sure that folks who would normally not pay attention to elections and not turn out were so motivated enough to come out in the numbers that they did?
So I'd say two things. One is like very abstract and conceptual, and the other is very mechanical and operational. So like on a high level, Trump was saying, I'm gonna win New York, I'm gonna win New Jersey. And like, like he's not gonna win New York and New Jersey. But actually that mindset of like, I'm playing for a super majority, he shot for the moon and he came back down to earth. And he had a message that he was projecting as if he was gonna win a super, that was for everyone. Was he gonna actually win black men? No, but was he going to improve with black men enough to make a difference? He did. And that was just such a contrast to the way the Democrats thought about the election, which was like trench warfare between 48%, just trying to eke out a few more inches to get over the finish line.
Just get a few more suburban moms.
Right, and so they were like aiming too low to ever get there. So that's conceptually. And then mechanically, the Trump campaign, and this was part of this strategy of going after lower propensity voters, they modeled down to the person, the people who were gonna, there was like 11 million people who they thought they needed to reach to win. And they figured out how to target them individually. For some people, they didn't have a phone number, they didn't have an email, the only thing they had was an address. So they sent them mail. For other people, it was about going to UFC fights or getting on certain podcasts, and defining. It was almost like you joke about running for like a party position where you have a small defined universe of voters and you just go after them individually. Like that's what the Trump campaign did, but on a full national scale.
And Tyler, I wanted to come back to you a little bit on Biden because I think one of the parts of the book that surprised me the most is, you make the case very convincingly, both of you, in the narrative, that Biden and the Biden camp, they're a group that feels like they have always been underestimated, undervalued, they've been counted out, they have a chip on their shoulder. And you bring that narrative throughout the story of why there was no one who was really telling Biden that he was too old because they felt like he'd already been counted out already. But part of it surprises me because Biden has been a politician for decades now. I mean, he's someone who has run numerous Senate campaigns. He has been very much in the mix. He ran the presidential campaigns. I mean, how did he get to a point where he's not meeting with his pollsters regularly, especially not after that horrific debate?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the psychology of Joe Biden, which we try to capture in the book and that you alluded to. Joe Biden is someone who, when he was 18, or when he was basically 18 years old, he met the parents of his first wife, and they asked him what he wanted to do, and he said, be president. And he had to clarify of the United States. So this is a man who has wanted to be the president since he was a teenager. And he finally did it, right? He was encouraged not to do it in 2015 by Barack Obama and his aides. He was encouraged not to do it in 2019 and 2020. And he was encouraged not to do it again at the beginning of his first term. And he felt like people were, as you said, underestimating him and discounting him. And he felt he was vindicated. He won the 2020 presidential election. Democrats overperformed expectations in the 2022 midterms. Most Democrats would say that was despite, not because of Joe Biden, powered on an issue, abortion, that is, he's not particularly in line with the party on, or wasn't most of the time. And so he felt that it was the same group of people that were underestimating him again. And he felt like he said, I beat Trump once. I'm the only Democrat to do it, and I'm the only one that can do it again. There's a lot more layered there, so you'll find out more in the book. I don't want to give it all away, but I also think there's two other things I would list. One is his aides did not have the highest opinion of Kamala Harris's political skills at that moment after the 2022 midterms. And so they felt there would be pressure on him to endorse her, and they weren't sure that that would be the best course of action. And two, and we write about this in the book, his aides long pointed to rankings from historians where they ranked him the 14th best president in American history. As I have said before, historians don't make up enough of the American voting population to make a difference in the election, but they pointed to that as evidence that he's doing a good job as president and he should be able to continue to do so.
And never mind what the polls say.
Right, they just ignore the polls. I mean, Mike Donlin, Joe Biden's longtime aide, I think people around Biden world would say he had a different view of polls than other people. Some might say they just thought he just ignored polls when he didn't like them. But they felt confident in their strategy, and they felt they had results to point to defend that.
And Tyler, I also wanted to get your thoughts. I think many of us saw the clip of Hunter Biden that made the rounds yesterday. And when I saw it, I immediately thought of your book and this whole idea that there is a chip on the shoulder of the Biden camp. And I'm curious, is this just Joe Biden's son expressing that frustration, or is there a deeper divide right now in the Democratic Party symbolized by Hunter Biden going after Obama and George Clooney?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. We write a lot about Hunter in the book and the influence and impact he had on his father's presidency and his campaign. And I think it's, even with all the discourse around Hunter, it's underestimated by the American public about the role he played, not even necessarily directly, but just sort of his presence and his challenges on his father. I think the clip is evidence of how Hunter Biden and Jill Biden, though obviously she didn't speak out, they hold Joe Biden's grudges. So Joe Biden famously says, I don't hold grudges. That's not fully true, but largely he was able to forgive and forget people. I mean, look at Ron Klain, who was ostracized from Biden world after he defected to Hillary Clinton in 2015 and then came back and was his chief of staff. So Biden's able to forgive much more than his family. And I think Hunter Biden is letting loose the grievances that he has felt from people that he feels have wronged his father, particularly over the last year and a half. I do think Hunter is expressing frustrations that Democrats have with party elites. I think anytime any party loses an election, it's easy to direct your attention at the sort of godfathers of the party. Obama, the strategist, the consultant class, like where else? Like it's an easy sort of populist rallying cry, like these people are destroying our party. I think with Hunter's case, it's more personal grievance driven than it is channeling the feelings of the Democratic Party. But I do think it's important that people know, like Hunter Biden, Mike Donlin, Joe Biden, they think that had Biden stayed in the race, he would have won. And they feel very burned by the pressure they felt from Democrats to drop out. The majority of the Democratic Party strongly disagrees with that take. And they think, in fact, Harris lost because she was too closely associated with Joe Biden. We can talk more about that later, but I do think Hunter is largely expressing the grievances he has long held against people he feels have hurt his father.
Can I ask us to just talk about that now? I mean, do you think that if Biden had stayed in, that there's any chance that he would have won based on your reporting?
No. I think, what Biden's aides would cite at the time and to this day is national polling that showed Biden down 2 points. The problem is American elections are not determined by a national popular vote. They are determined by swing states. And if you are down 2 nationally, you are down much more. And we have reporting in the book about the polling that the campaign had. There's this sort of seminal meeting a few weeks after the debate where the pollsters are meeting with Biden's senior team, and they walk through the various battleground states, and they say it's not just the Sun Belt and the Blue Wall that you have a problem in, it's Virginia, Minnesota, and New Mexico. I mean, there's this meeting that Joe Biden has with the governors right after the debate, about a week after, and Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor of New Mexico, Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, both warned Biden that he's in danger of losing their state. So just reading those tea leaves, those governors obviously know their states quite well. If they are concerned that Biden is going to lose their states that are safer Democratic states, you can only imagine what the panic was in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, which were necessary to winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And Isaac, I want to bring you in here, but since we are at the National Press Club and we do have a lot of reporters in the audience, one of, I think, the big questions that came out of 2024 was, how did so many political reporters miss the fact that Biden's mental health was declining? And certainly there were a number of reporters who did report on it, who did call it out, who did note it. But I'm wondering if you can sort of also look back a little bit on how the media covered 2024 and if there are some mistakes that we should learn from in terms of how we covered the president's mental health.
Yeah. So, I mean, a majority of Democrats, never mind voters, thought that Biden was too old, wasn't up to the job, and didn't want him to run. So it's not like people didn't see this with their own eyes. And there were any number of Washington Post headlines that we could point to about, that had Biden and age in the headline and were all about how this was his main political problem. It is a health and family are the most sensitive things to write about, even with a president. And so there was a lot of care taken about that. And I think the reality is that the refusal of sources to talk about it, including Republicans, by the way. Like if you put aside everything that the RNC research account was pumping out, you could interview Republicans who interacted with Biden, and they until the end, they were not saying like there's something wrong with him. Mm-hmm. They were saying the same thing that Democrats were saying. So you can write about what you see yourself. Mm-hmm. You can write about what the public sees in polling, and you write about what people tell you. And if people aren't telling you, then you can't make it up. And also for all the reporting, actually, a scoop in the book is when Trump met with Biden after the election. Biden invited him to the Oval Office for the customary meeting, and they meet for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and Biden goes through the entire world giving him advice about leaders and conflicts. And Trump himself walks out of that meeting and says, that is not the same guy who showed up at the debate. It's like a different person. So, that was Trump's assessment. So, the reality is there was not a secret condition that Biden had that was hidden. It was just the toll of time, the stress of Hunter's trial happening in the same month of the debate. We found out in the book was very important. There wasn't something hidden that we didn't see. It was just what we all saw, and I think we're struggling with as a community, as a nation, for how to talk about.
And I would just add one thing to that I think is really important in the book. There's a memo that we obtained that Joe Biden's senior aides wrote to him in April of 2024. Obviously, the debate gets a lot of attention for the impact it had, and we wanted to figure out, what the backstory is there. And the memo that we obtained is Joe Biden's aides making the case to the president that he should do an early debate. And the reason that they do this is they know that Biden is trailing. They want to raise more money. They're falling behind on that. There's just a bunch of reasons they feel they need to shake up the race. And in the memo, they write, we want you to reach the widest audience possible. That does not read to me as people that do not want Joe Biden out in public. Now, it is absolutely true that Joe Biden did fewer events. He did fewer press conferences, interviews. He was much more curtailed in terms of his public appearances than other candidates for president. And he was not a vigorous campaigner by any stretch of the imagination. But at the same time, his aides were telling him, we want you to reach the largest audience possible. And that's our advice to you about how to improve your political standing.
Sure. And so his aides were not worried about putting him out in front of everyone. And I think the book does a really good job, too, of breaking down everything that led up to the debate, from the travel to the sickness to, the amount of debate prep that got in and why certain things unfolded as they did.
Yeah, I think they definitely held their breath when he walked out in public, and they were nervous about it, but it was not, and they were careful about scheduling, and there was arguments and turf wars over that. But again, the memo is the clearest evidence, I think, to date of an effort to put him out there, and the belief that putting him out there was the best thing for his political setting. They weren't saying do a debate every week, so we have to caveat that, of course, but they wanted him to reach a wide national audience on this debate stage.
Sure. And with the debate, obviously that was a huge turning point for the race, for the campaign. I remember watching it here. I remember the vibe in the ballroom being like, oh my gosh, a lot of people who were surprised. It still took Biden 24 days to decide that he wasn't going to run. And again, great details in the book of kind of what was going on at that point, going to Camp David, having the family photo, the disconnect between what Biden's immediate circle was telling him and the rest of the Democratic Party freaked out. I do wonder, though, if Biden had dropped out sooner, if he had, if that bubble wasn't intact, if he'd been told right after the debate, y'all, it's over, done, do you think that would have made any difference at all for Kamala Harris?
I think it's hard to prescribe one event as changing the course of the election. I think there's two things that we can talk about there. One is Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and other national Democrats did not want Kamala Harris to be anointed as the Democratic nominee. They wanted a process, they wanted a competition, they wanted the Democratic electorate to have a say. So it's possible, and Kamala and her aides thought that was ludicrous and that there wasn't enough time, and she had the best claim and mantle to sort of take over the campaign and the party. It's possible with an extra 21 days, they could have made a more convincing argument to put together some sort of mini primary. So that's one. And I think Kamala Harris's aides think she needed more time. Other Democrats think she needed more separation from Biden. And it's unclear, had he dropped out right away, would she have found the space or ability to separate herself more from Biden? and it's just an impossible counterfactual to sort of prove. But I think one of the things the Harris campaign struggled with was sort of big moments and more opportunity for her to introduce herself. So it's possible that with that extra time, she would have been, taken more risks, done more media. But I think 21 days versus, 140 days versus 170 days, it's hard to know how much that would have changed things.
Sure. Isaac, I'm wondering too, if they had, because I remember this being a big debate, do you just go with Harris or do you try and have an open primary, and I think for a while it sounds like, that was what the hope was. If there had been open primary, did your reporting tell you anything on whether Harris would have actually won that or whether we would have seen a different nominee?
Well, one of the other things Tyler found out is when Biden calls Harris to tell her that he's going to withdraw, he says that he's not going to endorse her right away. He's going to take a few days and do a speech. And she tells him that's not going to work because other people will jump in and then it'll look like he's caving or he'll back off and it'll be a mess. And so she convinces him that he has to endorse her right away to head that off. So, I think that's another moment of could have gone really differently. And clearly she was concerned that, other people would challenge her and was trying to prevent that.
Mm-hmm. And Tyler, I think you covered Kamala Harris in 2019 as well, right?
Yeah.
So you've seen her arc over several different chapters here. Was there anything that you noticed about this time around with her campaign versus 2019? Was she making similar errors? Were there other things that you kind of just noticed as someone who's seen her and followed her for a number of years?
Yeah, I remember being on her bus tour in Iowa in 2019. And she didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses. I think it's hard to compare exactly because that was a Democratic primary and she's taking over a national campaign. I think across the board, her aides and longtime allies and even adversaries thought that she did a much better job. The debate was one of her high points, the debate with Donald Trump. Ultimately, it didn't seem to move the needle all that much, but I think even the Trump campaign would agree that she, not all of them, but some of them would agree that she won that exchange. I think one of the things that is sort of consistent throughout her runs for president is that she has struggled at times to present the sort of affirmative case. She, sort of rose to national prominence while as a senator, sort of prosecuting Trump and his agenda in those high-profile Senate hearings. And she was, spoke a lot about sort of Trump and the threat he posed, or the threat she felt he posed to the country. But there was some criticism that there was not enough about what she would do differently or what she would do for Democrats. We have this scene in the book where she's prepared to give her closing argument on the ellipse at the White House, sort of with this echo of January 6th. And Obama says, you can't just be anti-Trump, you need to be, what does Kamala Harris stand for? So I think that is something that she has struggled with in her sort of presidential runs, is sort of making the case of what she would do, not just what she won't do. Sure.
And if anyone has questions that they want to hand up, if maybe you want to hang them in the air, and then either Donna or Cecily, if Cecily's in the room, she's not. So if you want to maybe hand them down the row, and then Donna can grab them from there, and she will hand them up. But Isaac, I want to turn to you as well, because you were in, certainly the debate was one of the big moments. The other one was probably to Butler, Pennsylvania. I was listening to your book on audiobook when you guys first kind of mentioned that Trump's going to, and I think I gasped audibly, he's going to Butler. I'm like I don't know why, I knew that was coming. But you were actually there that day, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it was like to be there versus what it was like to have that look back while you were doing research for the book.
Yeah, that was one. There were so many things that we thought were important at the time that ended up not being important. And this was one where obviously we knew it was going to be important, but it wasn't totally clear how. It didn't. It's another one of these things where in a race, it didn't move the polls that much. Mm-hmm. That it certainly contributed to going to the RNC right after, there was a triumphalism, between that and the debate. And it was also that same week, the judge in Florida dismissed the documents case against Trump. So it really did feel like he was on fire in a good way for the Republicans. And I think with the benefit of more time, what we can say about the impact of Butler, of the assassination attempt, three things. For Republicans already in the Trump camp, it created a sense of that there was something more than human history going on here, that there was something divine is usually how they talk about it. There was a sense that God was on their side, but this was God, as they saw it, this was God actually reaching out and intervening to help them and Trump. And that gave a supernatural energy to the rest of the campaign that went all the way up to to Inauguration Day rather, Trump saying, essentially, I have a divine mandate to God saved me to make America great again. For people more on the bubble, there were definitely people who it changed how they looked at Trump. Trump was not someone who was often thought of as personally brave, to put it politely. But you don't know you never know how someone's going to act in that situation until it happens. And so I think he surprised a lot of people with that. And a lot of regular voters, but also a lot of very important people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who went from being a reluctant Trump supporter to Trump's biggest donor and came out and endorsed him that day because of the assassination attempt. And then the third effect was operationally on the campaign. For the entire fall, the logistics of security were like most of what they were dealing with. And that was because they had the first assassination attempt, they had the second assassination attempt, and then they were also getting briefings that Iran was trying to kill Trump, which the US intelligence officials said was not, they didn't have evidence was related to the two actual assassination attempts, but they couldn't rule that out either. And they did have intelligence that there were still real threats to Trump. And so that made, if you were sitting in the campaign at that time, like this was not politics as usual, this was a matter of life or death, and I think they ran that way.
Interesting. And was that kind of a turning point then? So it sounds like it was definitely a turning point for Trump, but I'm wondering too, just because there were so many other things that went on with Trump at the time, were there some other key turning points that maybe really helped him lock down the votes he was needed and even just kind of come back into the Republican fold after really being an outcast after January 6th?
Yeah, so for that you have to look earlier, back to the beginning of the primary, where he was really at his political low after the midterms because Republicans performed so much worse than expectations. I think politically, even at the end, that's when he actually launched his campaign, politically even weaker than after January 6th in that moment. And it was only because of essentially the head start that all the other candidates gave him by waiting until the spring and waiting until after the first indictment for DeSantis, the main challenger, to get in and actually run against him, that he was able to let Republican voters kind of get over the sting of the midterms, remind them what they liked about him, and start really took advantage of that head start to, as one advisor put it, firebomb DeSantis on the tarmac. So that by the time DeSantis got in, it was kind of already too late. The other thing that he did for a more general audience is the campaign talked about making him into a cultural phenomenon, which, for most of Trump's life he was before, and for younger Americans, they didn't remember like less threatening celebrity Trump before he was a divisive politician. And so reintroducing him that way to the younger voters and reminding older Americans to look at him that way helped soften him and again, remind people what they like about him.
We do have a question from the audience asking if Trump was the inevitable as the 2024 nominee, kind of asking, what if DeSantis, the wheels had not come off? What if someone else had caught fire? I mean, was it always going to be Trump? Or could some of the folks who were running against him have just run a better campaign and gotten the nomination?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the DeSantis people insist that at the point he was going to get indicted 4 times and that was going to take over the news, then there was nothing they could do to break through. But the truth is that, DeSantis didn't even announce until after the first indictment. And the Trump campaign used that to create an air of inevitability around him, to go to everyone and say, this is happening, get on board, he will remember. But in a scenario where, by that point, Trump had already spread the gap with DeSantis, right? So DeSantis peaked right after the midterms and just went down from there while Trump was hitting him and DeSantis never had anything to say. And if you imagine a different scenario where Trump was down when the indictments happened, Trump still looked like a loser, still looked like yesterday's news, it would have been hitting someone who is down rather than forcing all Republicans to come to his defense, which surprised even him. He actually said in the interview with Josh for the book, like, these people were supposed to be running against me and all they wanted to do was defend me.
Yeah, it was a very interesting, that very Trumpian interesting dynamic that's there. I also wanted to ask just a bit about, since you mentioned that obviously you guys did a lot of interviews for this book. You talked to Trump, Tyler. I know you called Biden, and I don't know if you want to sort of briefly recap that. But the thing I want to, I guess, ask about is I'm curious, when it comes to sort of 2 different candidates in terms of access, you have Trump, who is more than happy to pick up his phone, talk to reporters, and then you have someone a little bit more traditional like Biden that, does not give out his phone number, does not answer calls. If he talks to reporters, the entire staff freaks out. How, as a reporter, do you deal with that sort of discrepancy between one candidate being so participatory in the reporting process and the other candidate just kind of stonewalling everyone out?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is this has sort of gotten lost because Trump has become so ubiquitous in doing interviews, but our book is the only book, sort of campaign book that Trump did an interview for.
And you can buy it outside,
yeah,
everyone.
If you want to know what he said. So I would just add that caveat. So I can take this a few ways. I'll first just sort of share the Biden story. So our colleague, co-author Josh, went down to Mar-a-Lago on January 10th, 10 days before the inauguration, and had an interview with Trump, and sort of captures the introduction of the book, captures just sort of the scene at Mar-a-Lago 10 days before the inauguration, which I think is just a fascinating window into what Mar-a-Lago and the presidency would look like and sort of the people around Trump. And I felt very strongly that I needed to speak to Joe Biden. I have covered Joe Biden since 2019. I've never had an interview with him. I've asked him questions. I've traveled around the country and the world, most states, many countries with him, and he just basically never gave an interview. He never gave an interview to the New York Times during his presidency. He never gave an interview to the Washington Post during his presidency either. After he left office in March of 2025, I got his phone number. And I had made, as any journalist would, multiple requests through his staff for an interview for a project I was doing, for a book, basically on many different topics, and was told no. On the book, I was told no. He was working on a memoir, and his participation in our book would conflict with his memoir. I thought that was not a particularly compelling excuse. So I got his phone number, and I called him. He didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message. Later that day, I got a call from him. He didn't know who was calling, but I said who I was. It's possible he knew. I mean, I spent a lot of my life following him around, reporting on him. He said that he was about to have dinner and that he would be open to having a conversation for the book the next morning. Immediately, I got texts and calls from his aides I did not immediately respond. I knew what their position was on this matter, and Joe Biden said he would talk to me, so I took his word for it. I called him the next morning. He picked up. He, in a classic Joe Biden fashion, was boarding an Amtrak train. He answered 2 very brief questions and did not say, "Don't call me back." He just sort of hung up because he was getting on the train. I called him back later. It went straight to voicemail. 2 days later, his number was replaced with a message from Verizon Wireless that his number had been changed or disconnected. I got many calls from his aides and very angry at me for calling him. I can't say much more than that, but they were not happy. My perspective on the matter was someone gave me his number, I called, he never told me not to call him, he never said stop calling me, and he said actually the opposite, I will talk to you. So it was obviously frustrating that we did not get the same amount of time with him. Look, I think that is a challenge we face with all principals, presidents in particular. I mean, Donald Trump is the anomaly, not the norm. Joe Biden is, I think, the most extreme case of not engaging with the press. It's a challenge. I think all presidents should talk to the press more. And we did the best that we could, right? We made every effort. I obtained the president's cell phone number and got him on the phone. That's sort of the lengths we went to for this book to give people an opportunity. I mean, the other thing that we did, and this is not exactly a question, but I think it's important in this setting to talk about, is every single person named in the book, we had a spreadsheet, we went through every single one and called them and gave them an opportunity to comment on whatever way they were represented in the book. For Biden, Harris, and Trump, we sent 40-page fact checks, giving them all an opportunity to respond. We didn't send them the manuscript, but we sent them facts and details, giving them a full awareness of what we plan to report and an opportunity to comment. And we thought that was very important as part of sort of our goal to deliver the definitive and comprehensive story of this election was a very detailed fact-checking. We did that on our own, and we also hired one of our brilliant colleagues, Julie Tate, to do fact-checking with us as well.
Mm-hmm. It was actually kind of funny to read the book and have a very captive narrative, and then at the end it's Trump campaign said it didn't happen. I'm just that kind of just adds to it. It's just oh, okay, we see where the concerns are. We've got another question. I think because you two are both White House reporters, I think there's a lot of curiosity, I will pick the word curiosity, about what is currently happening in the White House for reporters. And they ask what the mood is like in the White House press room right now. Is there fear, or is it normal?
I think it is much more crowded than it has been. I think there are, I'm not sharing anything that I'm sure you don't know. There's a lot more outlets, non-traditional outlets, but particularly outlets that are unabashedly supportive of the president in the briefing room, in the press pool. You see the president every day interacting with people, and the range of questions he gets it's quite extreme in terms of reporters and others and the way that they're asking questions. So I don't know that I would say that, speaking for myself, there's not fear in the briefing room. I think it is a very different dynamic, but I think, and I've only covered two administrations, every press secretary sort of creates their own environment. In the Biden administration, I wouldn't say that the press briefings were all that helpful in terms of getting information about the president. And so, I don't want to compare and contrast directly any press secretary to one another, but there's always a different mood and vibe and tone depending on who the president is and who the press secretary is.
And Isaac, what's been your experience just going from one administration to the other? Is there a big shift between the second administration versus the first Trump administration when it comes to press briefings and access and just being a White House reporter?
Well, the biggest, and I didn't cover the White House in the first administration, but the big difference, I would say, in everyone's experience is there are not the current team is in sync in a way that was not there the first time. And so you are not getting the same kinds of leaks and backstabbing and palace intrigue that you were in the first Trump administration, because the people who are there now are committed to him personally, committed to him ideologically, and just not playing that game.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of seems like, before the Republican Party did not have that MAGA element to it. And now that MAGA element is so ingrained within the Republican Party. And I also imagine you guys do a lot of very interesting details in your book about Susie Wiles. I mean, Chris LaCivita as well, but I think Susie Wiles is, you kind of paint her as the reason why there's more structure and order. And is there a reason that you guys have kind of caught on to as far as why she was the one who was really able to unlock Trump to be organized, to be focused, to be on message, to not be wasting time with people who were maybe not helpful to the overall mission? What is it about Susie Wiles that has allowed her to crack a nut that many other people were not able to?
So a few things. So they built a special trust because he viewed her as winning Florida for him. So he liked her. He sent her to help DeSantis in 2018. DeSantis turned on her and tried to end her. And Trump welcomed her back when she was at her lowest. And that always meant a lot to her. And then similarly, when Trump was at his lowest personally, I said he was at his lowest politically after the midterms, but when he was at his lowest personally after January 6th, I mean, not eating, not golfing, really not himself, he asked her to come help him and rebuild his operation, and she was there for him. Her father was Pat Summerall, a big personality, I think difficult man to manage. And so there's something going on that's a layer of the relationship, both in terms of how she relates to Trump and how he relates to her. That's a real bond. And so because he trusts her, she is able to, she doesn't try to manage him the way that other chiefs of staff have done, which he really doesn't like. She can hold a line with him selectively when she needs to, but she doesn't make him feel managed. She does manage down a lot. She is, again, because she has his backing, she is able to gatekeep and keep the staff in order in ways that others have not.
So managing down, not managing up, and also trauma bonding to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's fair.
Trauma bonding and mutual hatred of DeSantis.
Yes.
I mean, I have got many wonderful relationships based on mutual hatred of a person. So that's the tried and true formula, right?
Absolutely.
Another question. Do Democrats have a plan for the next election, and what your thoughts are on that? I mean, obviously right now it seems like Democrats are kind of out in the wilderness trying to find a path forward. Lots of very interesting components, just looking at, say, the New York mayoral elections. What are you seeing as far as what is next for Democrats and how they're trying to rebuild after a crushing loss in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a party that's a little bit lost. I mean, my colleagues just wrote a story about the autopsy report that the DNC is doing that does not plan to address should Biden have run, should Biden have dropped out earlier, should Kamala have been the nominee. So sort of avoiding the big questions of the 2024 election.
It feels like that's the bubble mindset that led to Biden.
I think there's a lot there, a lot of frustration with that. But I think the Democratic Party is going to try to work out those questions through the 2028 primary. So I think we will see a large field of candidates, and that will represent a variety of personalities and ideologies and sort of the spectrum of the party from the left to the more center. And I think that will sort of, the voters, as we say, the voters decide, that will help clarify what direction this party will go in. And I think, there's a lot of people that feel like they are the one to help the party through this wilderness stage where they're locked out of power in Washington. And we'll see. I mean, I think also, there's obviously, rightly so, a lot of focus on Democrats, but it's also going to be really interesting on the Republican side. We expect an open primary. Vance, there's a lot of, characters on the Republican side and sort of who takes the mantle from Trump. So I find the next election will well, I mean, 2024 was really interesting. I imagine 2028 will be too.
Yeah, Trump he's not yet given Vance his blessing as the heir apparent. Yeah. And Isaac, I didn't know if you wanted to add to that at all, just in terms of, what. Shoot, now I forgot what the question was. But
the future of the Democratic Party.
That was it.
Yeah, I mean, so, the flip side to how the Trump campaign succeeded in expanding the electorate based on people who don't vote that often and are personally, were drawn to Trump's personal appeal is they won through people who don't historically vote that often and were really just there for Trump. And so whether that's going to be durable when Trump's not on the ballot, and especially in a midterm, that would be really interesting. But I think part of what happened is the Democrats overperformed in the 2022 midterm and learned all the wrong lessons from it for 2024, whereas the Republicans learned the right ones and dealt with it. Mm-hmm. And so, you could have a situation where Democrats do really well in 2026, but learn all the wrong lessons from it.
Which is kind of makes that autopsy that's avoiding a lot of the big issues even more interesting. Can I ask, I think part of this question got answered in terms of why Kamala Harris lost the election. I mean, I know that you pointed out she couldn't define herself from Biden. She had trouble defining the campaign. Obviously, she had a very tight window to run. But was there anything else that your reporting kind of dug up that really had a moment where it's like, this was not good, and future Democrats who run probably should not do this?
I mean, there's a few. I think the View moment that everyone knows well, she went on The View and said she wouldn't do anything differently than a historically unpopular president. Maybe not historic, but he's not the most unpopular president ever, but at that moment he was not particularly popular. So that's one. Another is, I think there was this sense that from like a strategy perspective, she didn't take a lot of risks in terms of reaching out voters. So Democrats were very frustrated. Trump was getting all this attention and popularity from appearing on these podcasts, Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, sort of that manosphere type of podcast where, as Isaac was saying, he became this sort of cultural figure. Kamala Harris, the Democrats struggled to find the counterweight to that, and also Kamala Harris took more than a month to do an interview. And so I think this sort of, we're seeing now Democrats do it. Like every Democrat that wants to run for president is sitting for whichever podcast will have them. Ro Khanna, Pete Buttigieg, Andy Bashir, like we're seeing them just sort of be ubiquitous because I think they felt that that was a problem for Harris, is that she was too focused on the big rallies and the carefully scripted appearances. And in this ecosystem, people just want content and they want authenticity. And so I think those were some things that she struggled with too.
Well, I know we are coming up on the end of the hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I do have one final question, but before I get there, I do want to take a moment to thank so much our Headliners team who puts together these and other really great events. A huge thank you to the team leader, Jen Judson, as well as Donald Lyman-Leger, who is just absolutely fantastic. A huge thanks to our entire team that pulled this off, the club's executive director, DDA Soji, as well as Cecily and Madison, our amazing staffers here today. Just for your calendars, we have another fun event coming up on Thursday at 9:30 a.m. We are hosting the NCAA president and former Massachusetts governor, Charlie Baker. He's going to speak at a breakfast. We hope that you will all join us for that. And of course, I also have the National Press Club mug, the official mug of the National Press Club. Isaac, Tyler, thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you enjoy many cups of coffee during the inevitably long hours that you work, both at the White House. And for the final question, have you considered at all doing a book on 2028? And can we expect to maybe have you back here in 2029 talking about that?
Be happy to be back anytime you'd like me.
And I just want to give a personal shout out to Donna. For those who don't know, I was an intern for Donna when I was a sophomore in college at USA Today. So I owe a special thanks to her for being a mentor and friend for many years. So thank you for having us.
Full circle moment. Well, thank you guys again so much. Really appreciate you coming today. And definitely make sure you read the book. It's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so
guys.
much. That was
really
great.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.